Compassionate, experienced, unwavering, approachable. These aren't just traits you want in a personal injury attorney. They're how clients describe the team at Habish, Habish & Rotier. Right here in Madison, their attorneys are dedicated to guiding you through the complexities of the legal process with confidence and care, helping to calm the uncertainty and support your path to healing. For all types of personal injury cases, Habish is the name locals trust. Habish, Habish & Rotier. National reputation, hometown service. Visit Habish.com or call 1-800-2-HABISH. Calling all Madisonians, musicians, and music lovers. Mark your calendars for Make Music Madison on June 21st. Make Music Madison is a free annual musical extravaganza performed by anyone and enjoyed by everyone. Every year on June 21st, over 2,000 cities across the globe celebrate Make Music Day. Here in Madison, we host the largest event in the country with more than 600 free shows across the city. Check out MakeMusicMadison.org for a listing of performers, times, and venues.
Today on CityCast Madison. Nurses are there to take care of us at the best of times and at the worst of times. But who's there to take care of them when the hours get long, waiting rooms are full, and the patient load is almost too much to carry? Nurses at Unity Point Health Meriter Hospital were pushed to their limits and made the historic decision to go on strike at the end of May. After 5 days on the picket line and months of negotiations behind the scenes, these nurses have secured a new and improved 2-year contract. To get the details on the agreement and a better understanding of the working conditions inside the hospital, we spoke with Pat Rays, president of Service Employees International Union Wisconsin and a nurse at Unity Point Health Meriter. It's Monday, June 9th. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling in for Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Pat, welcome to CityCast Madison. We're so happy to have you on.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, after a 5-day strike and months of contract negotiation, unionized nurses and management at Unity Point Health Meriter Hospital has reached a deal.
Yes, we did.
Congratulations. And, we're going to get into the specifics of that deal a little bit later in the conversation. But first, how are you feeling?
Tired. It was a really long, short week last week. So balancing the art between union leader and a working nurse can be sort of challenging sometimes. So that makes it a fun adventure, but we're ecstatic. We're very excited. We just had a debrief with some of our worksite leaders that it was awe-inspiring, powerful, just magnificent, transformative type words that it really did make a world of difference for the voices of nurses. And, this is the first time that a lot of nurses have done anything union-wise within our group. So this has been an opportunity for the nurses to really figure out that they have a voice not just inside the hospital, but outside the hospital also.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, we have been following this strike. A lot of people in Madison have been following this very closely these last couple of weeks. And you guys started this strike back on May 27th to demand a raise in compensation, better staffing, and increased safety measures. And in addition to being the president of Service Employees International Union, the union that represents the nurses, you're also a nurse at the hospital. So can you give us some of that firsthand insight into these problems that nurses were facing?
One of the key safety issues was the fact that we did not have a metal detector. And as we have seen a rise in incidents of violence against hospital workers or healthcare workers across the last several years, we have been talking safety with management at our labor management meetings over the last 4 years without much success. They had a metal detector in storage. At first they said, we don't have manpower to operate it. And then they said, it doesn't fit where we want it to go. And it's like, it doesn't do anybody any good. And there are evidence-based studies out there that show just having a metal detector decreases the risk for the staff and patients inside because people are more leery about going into a facility with anything. And we've had guns found at discharge, and that's the wrong time to find them.
Absolutely.
We have family members that come in and slam a knife down and say, so tell me how my family member's doing. And it's like, you showing violence to us is not going to change the outcome of your family member. And we do a lot of work in very emotional situations, life and death. And people are very emotionally involved in what's going on. And as a nurse who has to provide the bedside care in those instances, we want to feel safe at work. I've been a nurse for 35, almost 36 years now. And, it is not uncommon to get yelled at and sworn at, and you sort of blow that off or you set your limits. But I've also had IV poles swung at me. So, you have to be careful and you have to be aware of your situation. And the cool thing is Meritor is aware of that. They do trainings in safety and security, but we were really concerned that we weren't being heard. And because we had a letter of commitment in the past with no teeth, you have to understand how important this is. And so that was one, safety was our key reason for this action because we were tired of not being heard.
Yeah.
Our theme throughout the whole bargain was listen to the nurses.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it's a very high stress environment, no matter which way you spin it, right? And you guys, as in the nurses, are putting your bodies on the front line. So I can see why safety is that top priority there. So, we've talked about this in the podcast in the past, and you touched on it as well, is that, violence against hospital workers has been going up in the past few years, and that's across the nation. So I know that it's not just folks at Meritor that are dealing with this, it's folks across the country. So, I mean, you guys are clearly being very proactive about it because it's a huge thing and you would hate to see anything escalate further.
Exactly. And that was a lot of our theme is it's like we want to get something in order before it becomes something happens rather than a reactive after something happens. We do a lot of work on dismisses. Where did we dismiss and where did the systems fail us leading up to that? With a just miss versus something actually happening. So how can it is much better to catch it as a just miss than it is to catch it after it occurs.
Absolutely. And again, that really just underscores the need for these safety protocols and these safety measures. And I know that a big part of safety too, it also comes down to staffing levels. That was a big thing that y'all were pushing for. And then also increased pay wages. Can you tell us a little bit more about those aspects as well? Why do we need more staffing levels? What's going on there too?
Meritor, honestly, for majority of units, we follow that specialty's area of recommendation. So like our postpartum moms, the best practice standards recommends 3 couplets. And that is really what Meritor strives to do. The challenge is, when you have an empty bed, but you don't have the staff and you're being asked to stretch a little bit. Can't you just stretch and take one more patient? And is it possible? Yes. Is it putting all of the patients that we're taking care of at risk? Yes. And, it's not just the one patient you're stretching with, it's all of the other patients because you can't get into every room as frequently as you did prior to taking on that extra patient. And admissions and discharges are very time consuming. And so those drag you away from the bedside. And nursing is a classic example of interruptions by severity.
Sure.
And it's interruptions that in turn also cause us to have errors or mistakes. And so, just giving meds, if you can give somebody their medications without an interruption, you're much less likely to make a mistake than if you are interrupted because you lose your train of thought.
And again, I mean, it's people's lives that you're dealing with here.
Well, and that's every decision. Every decision we make could be life or death, which is why, there have been times in the past where I've had to call in sick because I'm like, I am too tired because of a baby being sick all night to be able to safely take care of my patients. So I have to choose to stay home to take care of myself. But then you get guilted. You get guilted by management or you get disciplined by management. And it's like, that's not right. We need to be able to have that safety factor falling into those things. And those are a lot of the conversations that we have is, what is best for the patient? What is best for the unit? What is best for the hospital? And we have to weigh that all in every day. My family hates to play cards with me because it's like, nobody's going to die from this decision.
She's all in, folks. But I mean, that's very serious. It is very serious. And also brings up the point, too, that nurses, you are people. You are not robots. It's very easy to ask a machine to do more. You can only stretch a person so far, right? Again, before they break, before they bounce back, before there are serious consequences here. And so I know that, these are things that nurses, you guys have been asking for a while. And this was a pretty historic movement for y'all. This was the first time that Meritor nurses have gone on strike, but they've been threatened in the past. And, thankfully, resolutions were able to be reached. That was, partially due to the help of federal mediators, but that wasn't an option this time. So I'm curious, did that lack of federal support impact this need to strike? Or was this really just sort of a tipping point where y'all said enough was enough?
I think it had an impact. The federal mediators for the Midwest area are all on administrative leave, courtesy of Trump right now. They were hoping to come back. What is really cool is here in Wisconsin, we have the WERC, which comes back to the Peace Act. Most of the states don't have their own mediator factors. And so when we filed the strike notice, WERC came to both sides and said, hey, we are willing to mediate if that will help.
Right. And that's the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission.
Correct. And so that did help. It gave us a more neutral way to help have some conversations that we weren't having previous. And it was a big change. We've been using the federal mediators for the last 10, 12 years that I can recall towards the end when it gets down to that nitty gritty. And we did miss it, and Meritor did use that as a speaking point in the media that we were refusing a mediator. And it wasn't that we were refusing a mediator. It was that the mediator wasn't available.
It wasn't an option.
Yeah. And that makes a difference.
For sure. Yeah. And you mentioned it, but final negotiations were conducted with the aid of, the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission, that mediation. So clearly it does make a difference there and it is important.
Correct. Yep. So, and there's power plays on both sides. And, it's a game of chess is what it comes down to, and who can crown the king or queen or whatever it is first. But it really is a lot of tactic, process. And
I know that the nurses on strike, y'all love your jobs. I had seen chalkings, in the area that said, we'd rather be working, which is, very, very big sentiment there. So, I want to talk about the strike. What was it like on the picket line? What was the energy like? What were the feelings like? Paint that picture for us.
Right from the beginning, it was so cool to watch the nurses walk out. And on Wednesday, I got a photo that one of the nurses walking out took, and you just saw this wall of nurses and supporters and community standing there waiting to receive them with open arms. And it was a very powerful moment. And the nurses that walked out said just how embracing it was to know that many people had the support. Because this was not an easy decision, and every nurse had to make the decision whether they could afford it, ethically if they could rationalize walking out, because it feels very hurtful that you have to be able to understand that when a nurse is walking a picket line, they're walking the picket line to improve conditions for the patients in the hospital. It's not just about the nurses. It's about everybody inside of there. And that's important, that we were fighting for safety for our patients. And once you can get that understood and understand that it is management's responsibility to staff, whether we're in strike or not, whether we're, short-staffed or not, that's not because the nurses aren't showing up so much as management does not have appropriate staffing to cover sick calls and full staffing, because hospitals tend to staff to average capacity, which is at midnight, not during the day when we're at our busiest. And so that plays a big role into how staffing happens. And since the joint agreement between UW and Meritor, we have been running close to full capacity during the days. It is not uncommon to discharge a patient, and while you're wheeling a patient out to leave, you're getting a call saying that as soon as that bed is clean, you're getting another patient.
You're underscoring a lot, again, the humanity of the situation, right? We're talking about real people on both sides of the conversation. For the nurses, you are real people. For the patients, they are all real people, and there are real consequences to these actions. And, I know that too, before going on strike, nurses, y'all received kind of a notice that your insurance would be at risk if you went on strike. Again, a very real consequence and a very real concern for folks going on strike. Like, was that concerning to you guys? Did that at all waver any folks in the decision to strike?
It truly did. And even before they threatened it, there was some concern. I was having people call me daily, or if not multiple times a day, different people calling, going, Pat, I have this health issue that I'm getting treated for, and I've waited for this appointment that's next week for 8 months.
Yeah.
I can't lose my insurance. And I literally told my workers, I go, I would like you to join us on strike, but I understand if for personal reasons you cannot, be it financial, be it loss of insurance, be it whatever. I am not going to ever hold that against you. I told people, if you are worrying to the point that you're putting yourself at health risk, don't. Go to work. We're not going to make fun of you. We're not going to harass you. We're not going to do anything. We're going to come back and be side by side saving lives. So don't feel like you cannot cross the picket line if it is better for you and your family to cross the picket line. And that's very different from a lot of other unions. But it's part of that human factor.
You don't need to use an oversized AI model for everything, just like you don't need to use an axe to slice a cake. Find out how smaller models can deliver the right results and help cut AI costs up to 90% at IBM.com. The AI built for business, IBM. Looking for an AI glow-up that passes the office vibe check? What? AI that only knows the internet doesn't make sense for business. Get AI trained on your data at IBM.com. The AI built for business, IBM.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
I want to come back to the resolution of this strike. So on May 31st, you guys announced that there was an agreement that had been reached, and that came between the nurses and hospital administration. So can you tell me about what was in that deal that you guys came into agreement? And I know that the union voted on it with a very big majority, so people seem to like it.
Well, going into Friday night late, the biggest stumbling block was really the safe staffing ratios language. And the bargaining team realized that we're not going to get ratios, then had to figure out what we could get. And there was, lots of personal biases on both sides. And so there was a lot of communication issues and understanding what was needed. And 1:00-ish, we had a sidebar to talk about that. And management was like, we're leaving. We're tired. We have to go home after our 16 hours and go to and be able to drive home safely. And we're like, yeah, we deal with that all the time.
Yeah, we're doing this every day, right?
Right.
Talk about
and we
safety.
asked them to stay 15 minutes because we had been also working on an economic proposal and trying to figure something out. We threw an economic Hail Mary. And it was enough to get them back to the table on Saturday, which is fantastic. And with that economic Hail Mary we threw, I think they came back to the table. We were able to get what they needed and what we needed. And that's how we got to the resolution.
Yeah. And so I've seen that wages, you guys are getting a 10% increase over 2 years. And then there are contracts, language also contains, quote unquote, enforceable language that addresses the safety of healthcare staff and patients. So that was a big point.
Right. And they have committed to meeting at least once a year to talk about staffing and where there may be gaps and issues. And so on our side, we also have notice of risk forms so we can start gathering information and have hardcore information to present during those meetings.
That's huge. And I saw that you guys are, in fact, hopefully going to be getting that metal detector too.
Yes, we are. That was one of the things they announced the week before bargaining or the strike to try to dissuade us from striking.
And I know regarding that deal that you guys struck, the hospital's chief nursing officer said, quote, "We're grateful for the dedication and hard work of everyone involved in the negotiations. This tentative agreement represents meaningful progress towards a contract that recognizes the important contributions of our nurses. The contract includes competitive wage increases on top of what is already one of the highest paid nurse workforces in Wisconsin. Meritor believes that this contract will help them retain long-term nurses as well as recruit new members to their team." So do you think in that statement, does that reflect how nurses in the union also feel about the deal?
We are moving in the right direction. We had to drop a lot of the differential things that we think would have benefited and helped in retaining nurses. Part of the safe staffing component was how do we prevent burnout? And,
Which has been a huge issue in the industry, in a lot of industries. But yeah.
And it's not burnout, it's moral injury, because you cannot take care of somebody like you would want your family member to be taken care of. And when that happens, it gets to you. It just nags you in the heart. And when you don't feel like you've done a good job, it has that impact. And I keep reminding myself that my grandmother was a nurse. She graduated in 1932. And when she graduated, her nursing instructor gave her a poem that talked about, God forgive me for not being able to take somebody the fresh mug of water because I was busy doing something else. And that continues to be the issue. In a world of interruptions, it's awfully hard to remember that somebody wanted some fresh water when you're doing a code. And nurses have to be able to turn off and on because you may be involved in a medical emergency, doing chest compressions, pushing meds, fighting the war to save somebody's life. And then in the next moment, go into a room and get yelled at because somebody had been waiting an extra 2 minutes to go to the bathroom. And you don't get time to really process through the war over life before you have to go on. And it might be 12 hours before you get off work that you have time to process it, and then you're dealing with things at home, so you're not even processing it there, and then it starts adding up and it starts weighing you down, and it's a real challenge. Yeah. And that's, and after COVID and the pandemic, that has all weighed into it, and people are like, I just can't do this anymore. And hospitals and companies and healthcare stuff are going more and more towards factory trends of production. And we are dealing with humans. I can have one patient that it takes me 3 minutes to give them their meds and go into the next room and it takes me 15 minutes to give one med and I have 20 to give. Mm-hmm. So how do you balance that out?
Yeah. Again, it's all about that human component, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is at the core of this conversation here is just humanity. And, with that in mind, I'm curious, what lessons can the rest of us learn from this strike?
Healthcare workers, they work very hard to balance out between family life, work guilt, and those emotions that are tied in. Healthcare workers miss a lot of family activities, not because they want to, but because they have to. And the patients mean the world to us. Our families are really what drives us, but it's being able to be there for people on the best days and the worst days of their lives and helping them through that with as much grace and dignity that we can. That gives us the power to come back the next day. And when we can't meet those goals, that's when we really start wondering if nursing is the career for us. And we have lost, in the last 5 years, way too many young nurses because they don't have the time to really learn. They get celebrated when they flex up and take care of 7 patients overnight, rather than saying, that should never happen again, because that is not the right answer. Healthcare workers are going to be the foundation of getting the healthcare changes. And it's going to be not just the healthcare workers, but the patients, the people of the community, raising their voices to say enough is enough, that we have to get the hedge funds out of healthcare who are taking the profit and taking away money from patients to get the care they need. And it's going to be the voice of the people that hopefully brings around universal health care. It is not right. It is so inhumane that anybody has to make a choice between health care, going into debt for their families' lives, or not being treated and choosing to die without appropriate care and dignity when a major life crisis comes on. And people are going to choose to not seek treatment because they don't want to put the burden on their families. And that's not right. That is not the American way.
There's clearly, so many facets in this topic. We could go on for a really long time on this one. And again, it really just underscores the human factor in all of this and the human factor in what y'all are fighting for. And, with that, Pat, thank you so much for coming on today and explaining all of this to us. I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate your work as a healthcare provider. We all want to have the best care when it comes to us, because we know it's not an if, it's a when. And I feel great knowing that there are people like you fighting for your protections in the field so you can help us when we need it too. So, Pat, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I truly appreciate the time.
That's Pat Reyes, president of Service Employees International Union Wisconsin and a nurse at Unity Point Health Meriter. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling in for Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with a healthcare worker? And while you're at it, thank them for taking the best care of our community. And hey, speaking of best, did you know we're in the running for Madison Magazine's annual Best of Madison Awards? And we're not just in one, but 2 categories this year: Best Local Podcast and Best Local News Website. Will you help us take home the gold? Head to our show notes for a link to vote. All right, y'all. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care of each other.